Welcome to another episode of Muslim Glory. Today we're going to talk about Islam in Germany, and I'm really excited about that. I have made an overview of some of the most important things you should know about Muslims in Germany, but also the way Germany has navigated the world and Muslim countries and their history behind it. Okay, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the topics I will discuss today. The first one is the foundation of Germany and their religion, like the religion of Germans. And that will entail like all the celebrations they have, where they go back to what they are actually worshiping. And that honestly is very shocking. So I'm very excited for you. The second part is I'm going to talk about their current anti-Muslim government. The current government has a lot of prejudice against Muslims, and I'm going to tell you why it's founded on lies, first of all, but also what we can learn from that. Then we'll talk about, some of the Muslim sources. I always try to have a mix of Western sources and Muslim sources from way back who talk about, their encounters with the Germans because, as I've told you a million times, Muslim scholars and historians who have been part of the Muslim world were very accurate in how they reported on, how the world worked back then. And, many historians actually also say that we should definitely follow the Muslim scholars because they were known to be very accurate in the way that they talked about history and they wrote about history, that they were not likely to lie, and that, a lot of the European and Western researches and resources we have often are, manipulated. They're often manipulated to make the people believe a certain thing and to also hide certain things that, these Western powers have often done. So I have to include that, obviously. So it's going to be a bit about how the Germanic people interacted with Muslims like 1,000 years ago. And I think that's really interesting to know. Then I'm going to talk about Germany's policy during World War II and World War I. And it's very surprising. Like, I was a bit shocked to learn about all of this. But yeah, I think you need to know. I think it's really important to know. I'm going to talk about some of the atrocities, obviously, the Germans committed, but also about what's going on right now in Germany, in the world, and how they are, treating Muslims and how they're going about their foreign affairs, because it actually became very important like last week. Okay, so we're going to start off with where do the Germans come from? Well, the Germans, are made up by the Germanic people. And the Germanic people are like a larger type of tribe who went to many countries in Europe. And, part of them went to Germany, part of them went to Scandinavia, part of them went to the Netherlands, but also the UK. And so all these people, they actually at some point also made up or were part of the Roman Empire. And I think that's very interesting because that's going to be very relevant when we talk about their religion. Like, a lot of things are going to be, they're going to make sense. And, then we get to the religious part. I think one thing people need to know, and I think I didn't know this before, but basically, if you want to understand why Germans are violent today, you have to understand who and what they worship, okay? And honestly, I'm going to tell you, I was shocked when I found out about it. Like, I have been dying to talk about this. Like, I've been waiting to tell anyone, and now I get to tell you. I also told my driver, like, who brought me here because I was so excited. I couldn't wait. He was shocked. I was shocked. He was like, this is spicy. Those were his exact words, okay? Anyways, I'm going to tell you about the religion of the Germans. Okay, so they used to worship, I don't know if you heard about it, but Thor and Wodan. Like, those names I think are very familiar to people. These are the gods of the Germans, the Germanic tribes, amongst others, but these are very important gods. I don't know if you know this, but these gods are actually the gods of war. And so you have to understand that the most important gods to these Germanic tribes were the gods of war. And I feel like that in itself already tells you so much that you need to know about the Germanic people who are now in Europe, but also at some point went to the US. And if you're wondering why the US is the way it is, well, you need to go back to the religion of the Germanic people. Okay. I'm not just going to leave you with that. Okay. So they were worshiping, obviously, the god of war. And the biggest celebration of war, of the god of war, was actually starting in December, for 12 days after the 25th. They celebrated the pagan gods of war. Think about it. Where is Christmas celebrated very elaborately? It is actually in Europe, and it is actually in the US, and it stems for their celebration and worship of the gods of war. Okay? I'm going to be very specific also about these holidays because I think it's very interesting. And I based this on the book I read by Dr. Abdullah Hakim Quick. He is actually a PhD holder in history, and he studied at the University of Toronto. He's a scholar, a Muslim scholar, and he's very knowledgeable on the topic. And so actually in his book, it was written that Christmas, obviously we already know, that doesn't come from Christianity, but Christmas actually has a big connection to another one of those gods of war. Okay, and so very specifically, I'm gonna tell you which god that was. Who was it again? Blah, blah, blah. The actual birthday of a pagan god was the 25th of December. And obviously this makes sense because, Isa alayhi salam, he was not born on the 25th of December. And we know that Christianity was altered just to include a lot of pagan people. And so their celebrations are now a part of Christianity. Okay, so another thing that you need to know is that there was obviously the god of, I think his name was Saturn. And he is the reason that people give gifts, because these went back to the pagan god of Saturn. You need to know that gift giving on Christmas also has pagan roots. There used to be dolls that were given, and the dolls represented human sacrifices. Now they've become all types of gifts, but at some point they were candles and dolls that were being exchanged in the name of this god named Saturn, which was also representing human sacrifices. Then we have Santa Claus, also another one of those gods, but he was the god of drunkards. And Santa Claus is a very prominent figure, obviously still today in the West, like a figure who is being celebrated during Christmas, a very important person. And then you have another part of these celebrations, which are the Christmas trees. And the German Scandinavians specifically, they worshipped trees. So the Christmas trees that we not, I hope not you, but put in their homes are actually, they stem from this celebration. And the Christmas was at some point banned in the US and also in the UK because they directly related Santa Claus and this holiday to Satanism and pagan traditions. And so they said no, it's not allowed. But I think maybe only even 100 years or something like that Christmas was starting to get more prominence. I think it had to do with Queen Victoria, who was one of the first people to introduce it back into, the civilized world. And so that's why today many, many people in the world, they still elaborately celebrate Christmas. Okay. Then we have another holiday which represents, the celebration of the War of God, which is New Year's Eve. And that is a celebration of the war god named Janus. And, New Year's Eve is obviously a huge celebration in the West. And, Janus is actually the god of materialism. So New Year's Eve is the celebration of the god of materialism. And it's a huge celebration. I mean, you have in New York, you have, this huge, I think it's called dropping the ball or something. But worldwide, it's being celebrated in the most extravagant. And also, if you look at it, a way that a lot of money is being wasted by, spending on these holiday parties, but also on fireworks and all that. And basically, that represents the god of materialism, which is also a huge thing in the Western world. Another thing I found from the book of Dr. Abdullah Hakim Quick is that Sundays are an actual celebration in paganism as well. Another time where they're celebrating the god of war. And this time it is the god named Mitra. And so weekly, I even looked it up just now before I started the podcast. In Germany, it's very common still to close your business on Sunday. And basically, who they are honoring would be this pagan god named Mitra, who is also a god of war. And then, what really, when I started looking into this, like, I'm not gonna lie to you, like, things started falling into place. I was like, this is why, like, these countries are so violent. Like, the whole society is pretty violent. I mean, I think in the US only, I think they had in the past year, 2024, I think they had 500 mass shootings. Again, who are these like random kids or like boys who are, described as like, harmless kids who just go out and try to shoot as many people as they can. And if you look at a lot of the traditions these countries have, I mean, Germany is very famous for the Christmas markets, right? They're one of these countries who elaborately celebrate Christmas, and as is America as well. Like, they really celebrate Christmas. It's an official holiday. They spend a lot of money on it. It's like probably the biggest one they have all year, I think. And it all goes back to these war gods who, the Germanic people once worshipped because they were a very violent and militarized people, and they still are. And so I thought that was really interesting, honestly. Like, for me, when I found that, I was like, the whole podcast should be about that, because like, basically, if you look at the way the US is behaving right now, if you look at the way Germany is behaving right now, it's literally all about violence. It's all about consumerism. It's all about going after your lusts and your desires. And it's a lot of we cannot really explain why, but if you look at this explanation of the things they celebrate, I mean, it totally explains why. And so that, I think, is the highlight of this podcast, but I have more for you. Okay, so because I also want to tell you about the current anti-Muslim government. What's really interesting is that Germany, I mean, they have a lot of Muslims already, right? They have about 7% of the population is Muslim. But the Muslims aren't necessarily having the best time. I think in 2020, since 2020 until now, Al Jazeera reported that they have about double the amount of anti-Islam incidents. And I think that doesn't even include the past year, because I know the past year has been brutal for Muslims living in Europe. And basically in 2020, they've had a huge attack against the Muslims. There was a far-right extremist who, killed Muslims in, one of those attacks where, they purposely shot or killed. I don't know how he did it. I think he killed them, but I don't know how. Killed Muslims, and the government at that time did not want to admit that this was done in the name of anti-Islam. They always try to be very vague about it. Oh, it was a person with mental health issues. Oh, it was a person who was confused. No, he was not. He was someone who followed the ideology of the country and therefore got militarized. He was extremist because he was probably conditioned, and I would say, how do you say that? Like, brainwashed with a lot of propaganda against Muslims. And so, I mean, the German government, they have done long studies. I think they've done a study of 3 years on the topic of hate against Muslims. And from this study, they could learn that there's actually a lot of hate against Muslims. But again, the government disregards it, not taking seriously, the danger Muslims are in. And I would say even, kind of like brushing it off and giving people a green light, saying like, if you want to attack Muslims, go ahead. Because like, we basically know this is happening, but we're not taking any action. And I've talked about this before, like the thing is like with Muslims, it's very well known that they might be the most prosecuted people in the world right now. Although I think the numbers I could find were that Christians are right now, but I think in the past year, this has definitely changed. But a lot of times there is no budget for fighting this. Like on a European level, there's no budget to fight this. I know that the singular countries, they also don't want to make the budget to fight this. And that I think is very concerning. And I think it's also very painful for the Muslims living there. There was, I think maybe it was a year ago, there was like a Bavarian region where they had just won the elections. I think three hours after winning the elections, this far right extremist group, they actually published a video about Muslims, completely villainizing them, making them look like actual demons, and talking about how, terrible they were towards women, for society, how dangerous they were. And, that I think is a good indication of what German society is like towards Muslims, unfortunately. But okay, I mean, if you go back to the religion, it makes sense, right? It makes sense why, also they have found this group of people who completely do not, it goes completely against the values of their religion. So I get why that would be a clash. I'm not going to lie. Okay, something I really wanted to share with you is that, I don't know if you know this, but there's a huge movement against refugees in Germany. Okay. I would say Syrian refugees specifically are like a punching bag in German society. And what's interesting, however, and I think this doesn't only hold for the German government, it holds for other governments as well, is that a study done by, and I will tell you exactly who has done it, the German Institute of Economic Research, they have calculated what the expenses are that the German government makes for, giving these refugees a place. What I think every Muslim needs to know is that these governments, like the German government, they actually make money when they host refugees in their country. Same goes for the American government. I think if you know the numbers specifically, you would know this, but basically illegal immigrants, the government makes money off of them. The same goes for prisoners in the US. The government makes money off of them. All of these groups who they like to villainize in the media, the Germans do that with the Syrian refugees, they actually make money off of them. And so, this was a study done by, I think it was the Marriott Business University from Utah, and they found that the German government, every refugee that comes in actually makes money for the government. So the government is better off by inviting all these refugees. And this brings me back to something that I've mentioned a lot, something that Germany is famous for, scapegoating politics. They like to talk about certain groups of people as if they are the ones to blame for all the issues in the country. And I notice this is not just a German phenomenon. This is a phenomenon that happens in, I would say, all Western countries. They like to do scapegoating politics. And I think it's something that they can learn from the Muslim countries a lot, because if you look at, for example, the politics in the Middle East, a lot of the countries, they try to maintain social cohesion. And social cohesion means that you're not going to single out a group of people and pin all these issues on them. In fact, it's the contrary. They try to show examples of good behavior. If you live, for example, in the UAE, you will see that in the media, what's oftentimes highlighted is good behavior. And that's because these governments don't thrive on scapegoating politics. What they thrive on is people behaving well, thinking well of each other, treating each other well, and, maintaining social cohesion. And I think this is a huge issue worldwide. And I always try to tell the Muslims, who are watching, please do not participate in scapegoating politics. Sometimes we are taught to look at certain groups of people, even amongst the Muslims, and say, oh, they are the problem. They're the problem. This government is the problem. These Muslims are the problem. But we should not engage in that, because we are actually very clearly instructed to avoid backbiting, to avoid assuming negatively, and it's also Islamic to maintain social cohesion and to avoid social unrest. And so, this is something I think a lot of Western societies can learn from, that you don't do that. You shouldn't do that. You shouldn't do it to any group of people, that you make them look like they are the ones to blame for all issues. Okay. Anyways, what I wanted to share with you is 3 conclusions about German society. Okay. The first one is making money off your citizens. That's a totally Western concept. Yeah. Like if you look at the US, for example, if you look at the Netherlands, if you look at Germany, like they have a tax system which is meant to exploit their citizens. The Muslim world doesn't know that. They don't know that because as a government, actually, how they feel about their citizens is that they are the ones carrying the burden for them and creating an environment in which they thrive. And I know a lot of people want to say something against that, but show me something that does not illustrate that in the Middle East. The roads are perfectly well. If you look at a country like UAE, Qatar, Oman, Kuwait, these countries have infrastructures that enable the people to make money. Healthcare is taken care of really well. Education is at a high level. If you look at how they, for example, treat people of determination, it's with the utmost humanity and respect. And that is something that I think Western societies can learn from. Like a lot of people wonder why in a Western country, it can take you maybe 5 to 10 years to get the passport, whereas in a Muslim country like UAE, you cannot. Well, the big difference is that in a country like UAE, you hardly pay taxes. Okay. You pay maybe 10% since a year in VAT because they just had to comply with certain rules internationally. But generally speaking, these Muslim countries do not rob their citizens blind, I would say. And so, when a country like the US or Germany does give their people the opportunity to get a passport, it's because they make money off of you. It's not because they actually want to have people, and give them a chance to be a part of their country. No, it's because they know that when they invite refugees, they will actually benefit the most from it. That's number 1. That's conclusion number 1. Then I want to share with you the second conclusion is obviously the scapegoating politics. I've mentioned this before. Germany is making money off refugees, yet they scapegoat the refugees. And it shows it's not actually they're economically suffering by inviting these people in, but they will find one group of people and say they are the reason we are poor as a country, just to take the attention from the fact that the government is robbing its citizens blind. That is the West for you. I'm so sorry. I wish I could make it sound better, but that's exactly how the West operates. And many countries like Germany do the same thing. They will scapegoat Muslims. They will scapegoat some community and say they are the reason we are poor. Meanwhile, they're levying taxes of 50% on their citizens. And their citizens are so docile. They're so domesticated and also uneducated that they're yeah, the Muslims are robbing us. It's not the government who's taking half my money. Honestly, I cannot. But okay. The third conclusion I wanted to share with you is that one of the fears of these European governments, a lot of them have it. I know France has it. I know Germany has it. I know the Dutch have it. I think it's called Umvolkingstheorie in Dutch, but basically it means that they're very afraid that Muslims will take over. And it's so funny because they're always making calculations, trying to find out who is having more children. And I know in the Netherlands, for example, they're really trying to shame Dutch women, saying you're only having 1.4 child and you should be having, 2.6 child. Well, at the same time, they're doing everything to push these women into, the workplace, while also underpaying them, while also making them do all the house chores, while also making the babysitting services, really expensive. I don't know. To me, that's a really funny concept because I think if you're really worried about that, about Muslims taking over, because if you look at the stats, Muslims, the way they are procreating, they would probably within 1 or 2 generations, they would actually be a majority in the country. And I think if they would be very calculated about it, which is honestly something that really is hilarious, I think if they would be very calculated about it, they could actually be a Muslim majority within a year. Okay, I think if every Muslim in these European countries would like marry a Muslim abroad and not even the Muslims in the country, I think they could literally within 1 generation become like a Muslim majority country. Anyways, do with that whatever you want to do with it. Okay. So these are 3 conclusions that I want to share about Muslims in Germany. You know, they're really using them as scapegoats while they're actually making money off of them. And they're really trying to be like, you know, making people turn on them. But the thing is, I think this is mostly done because they're afraid of the Muslims actually becoming a majority. I don't know what the idea behind that is. Like, do they want them to leave? Or they just want their lives to be miserable? I don't know. But either way, like, I don't understand it completely. Maybe you understand. Maybe you can tell me, because to me, that is it's a bit weird. Okay. Anyways, I think I have almost reached. I'm finally on time. Okay. Anyways, I reached about half of the things I wanted to tell you. Actually, no, I didn't. I had to tell you so many more things. My time is almost up. Okay, I'm going to tell you one more thing very quickly, okay? Okay, anyways, what I wanted to tell you is also the Muslim sources who talk about the contact with the Germanic people in the past. And I posted a video about this, about Ibn Fadlan. Ibn Fadlan was like this well-respected Muslim diplomat, and I think he came from Iraq. And what's really interesting is that he wrote, I think he had a journal where he wrote about all his travels in the world, and he actually met the Vikings, who are also part of the Germanic people. And I posted about this because actually he found that the Germanic people had a lot of these pagan rituals, which he thought were disgusting. First of all, you know, they did these human sacrifices where they would mostly sacrifice women, especially if their husband or like partner died. The women also had to be sacrificed, but also they had this kind of like system where women would be passed around as like a token of friendship to foreigners. It was like complete disrespect in that kind of society. And I think it's interesting because I think they still have that a little bit, where women are, you know, expected to give their body freely in society by, you know, exposing themselves and like having free relations with everyone. And I think they do that and they make women believe that they do it because they're free. But if you actually do not want to participate in it because you wear hijab, for example, you're actually directly being told you are not accepted as a woman in this society. And that just shows to me like they have not really evolved from the times where they were like super unhygienic, super like woman unfriendly, and like worshipping all these pagan gods for war, for materialism, for being drunk. And yeah, I think the women also need to elevate themselves, because I feel like they have like Stockholm syndrome, where they actually start to like love their kidnapper. Like, if you have to take off your clothes just to get respect in a society, you are not free. You are oppressed. And I think they need to come to the Middle East to learn about freedom of your body, that even if you don't show your body, you still get respect. Like, that is a Middle Eastern principle that they could benefit from a lot. You know, inshallah, may Allah guide them, because I feel bad for them. Like, I think when you are actually taught from a very young age onward that you only matter if you give your body freely, like, that is true oppression, in my opinion. Anyways, I have like 1 minute left before this podcast is over. So I'm just gonna like do it a bit easy, because usually I'm rushing like crazy. But I want to thank you for coming to my podcast, Muslim Glory. Please subscribe if you want to become a public speaker like me, who travels the world and do like speeches and workshops and keynotes. Make sure to sign up for my program. I have a 200-step plan of $4.99 where you can learn how to, you know, set up your personal brand, how to approach clients, how to, you know, even as a person, develop those skills you can use to become a public speaker. And, you know, I look forward to welcome you into my program, and make sure to check out the next episode as well, because we have a lot of things to still discuss. What do we have to discuss? We have to discuss, we have to discuss like World War I, World War II, and other types of like massacres. And also, what happened last week in Syria when the Minister of Foreign Affairs went there to meet the new Syrian leader, Jalani. And there was a little bit of a scandal going on. And that is actually the reason I got inspired to do this podcast. Because I was like, why are they going around the world to like mess with people and their traditions and their beliefs like outside of their own country? Why don't you keep that, sexualization of women in your own country? Like, why do you have to bring it overseas? Anyways, we're going to talk about that. So that's it.